right, folks, it's Tuesday, January 9th, and of course, it is 2024. And while we're worrying about two old guys running for president, apparently France decided to do the opposite and all along those lines. So, Gabriel Adal become France's youngest and first openly gay prime minister. So, Gabriel Attal becomes France's youngest prime minister as Macron seeks a reset. And I believe that I had read somewhere that he was 34 years old, which definitely beats the notion of the folks that are in their 80s and late 70s that are running for the United States government and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what Nick and other members of the panel may have to say about the fact that we've got a youngster that is going to be running a major country and all in that kind of space. And Blinken is in Israel as the war threatens to expand. And Blinken delivers air message to Israel, and acceptance requires a Palestinian state, is what apparently that message was. And dozens were reported killed in Gaza as Blinken urges protection for civilians. So that is something else that we're seeing in the news. And there's always been this stereotype of certain Asian cultures eating dog meat and other animal meat. And apparently, South Korea has passed a bill to ban eating dog meat, ending that controversial practice. So that is something else that is going on in Asia. So apparently, that is going to be off the menu if you were going there to have that particular dish and all in that kind of space. So that is something that we're seeing on the news from the Asian front. And Taiwan has issued an air raid alert saying China launched a satellite. So that was going on ahead of their elections. And definitely Taiwan apologized after an emergency alert mistranslation led to missile warning for Chinese satellite launch. So that is something that is also being apologized for as well. So maybe it was a false report, but we'll be hearing more about this and hearing people's thoughts around that as well. So definitely that is going on. And coming back to Israel, an Israeli airstrike killed a Hezbollah commander. And definitely that is something that is being reported. And the slain Hezbollah commander fought in some of the group's biggest battles and had close ties to the leaders of Hamas. And definitely that is something that we are seeing in that part of the world as well. And definitely, it looks like Ecuador, if we go down to Latin America, is in a state of emergency after a notorious drug gang boss escaped from the prison. So they are definitely in kind of in lockdown in that particular country. And he may have all kinds of allies that might be even trying to help him since he was a notorious drug kingpin. And apparently he has vanished from the prisons, and Ecuador is launching a manhunt after the most wanted prisoner just vanished. So it definitely looks like there was some sort of escape that went on, and it'll be interesting to see what goes on in that way as well. So definitely looks like that is something that is also happening in the world that folks may be paying attention to and seeing where that goes and what might be happening with that. So definitely there are a number of things happening. We do know that there are things going on even in the world of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. I'm hoping Sasha comes in and has some thoughts about that. By the way, the U.S. has slammed the meritless Israeli genocide suit, and it is reigniting tensions with South Africa. So Netanyahu is red-faced as Israeli lawmakers and Bolivia back the Gaza genocide case in the ICJ. So I think that's the International Court of Justice, if I remember what those initials stand for, and in that kind of way. In the Maldives, the president is urging China to send more tourists amid their row with India. So they're asking for folks to come there and visit that particular country and all in that way. And Xi Jinping is to go after ants and flies as he intensifies his crackdown on certain kinds of firms and all in that way. So Xi tells corruption hunters to show no mercy in a severe and complex battle. So I guess that they might have some things going on in their corporate world as well. And the U.S. and the U.K. are paying attention to Bangladesh extension, which extended Hassani's rule. So definitely there are some folks that are paying attention to that part of Israel and seeing how that may go as well. And by the way, there was some good news in the news. So that's good when you have that. But a woman in her 90s was rescued after 124 hours after that deadly Japanese quake and apparently survived without power or water and is seeking news on the plans to rebuild after that devastation took place. And it will be interesting to see if folks have some thoughts about this good news that they were able to be rescued with perseverance and all in that kind of way. Uh, Somaliland defense minister resigns over the deal to give Ethiopia access to the region's coastline. So, Somali leader wants he will fight against Ethiopia Red Sea plan. And the Germany farmers protest that I mentioned yesterday is sparking chaos, and that is putting Scholz government on the ropes with a week of protesters and protest farmers are stopping traffic across Germany. And apparently some people are saying that that is a sign of a wider dissatisfaction. So definitely, like I said, there's a lot of things going on in the world, even things going on in Europe as well, because mass killer Breivik is to testify in Norway in a bid to end prison isolation. So the mass murderer is suing Norway over prison isolation. And in that way, so isolation in the Norwegian prison, making Breivik suicidal, according to their lawyer. And I'm sure that some people that are in isolation here in the U.S. might even have some thoughts around that as well. There was a story that I was going to get to yesterday as well. This is one of those lighter stories because I always do like to give some light stories as well before we get into some of the stuff with Russia and Ukraine and even the United States. But apparently, there is a mouse that is in Britain, and apparently, it was discovered tidying a British man's shed every night. So, maybe there are certain mics that are liking to keep things clean and all in that space. I might have to find the video, but apparently, their Welsh Tidy Mouse, which is the name that I think that was given, took on the task of keeping a United Kingdom man's shed clean. So there have been a number of videos where the person was apparently, I mean, the mouse was apparently doing some tidying up in the evening while that gentleman was asleep and all along those lines. So that's a nice little cute story. And we'll have to find out how the mouse was doing it and what papers he was moving and why he was moving the papers. Maybe he was moving it because he wanted some cheese. Who knows why he might have been moving that stuff. But if we get into more serious news, Russia has launched an airstrike on Ukraine. A heavy wave of Russian missiles attacks pounded areas across Ukraine, killing at least 4 civilians. And that is something else that we are seeing in the news. And looks like Trump will be attending immunity hearings and investigators home in on Boeing hardware in that particular case as well. So we might be seeing Trump going to the do maybe some testifying of his own and all in that space. And coming back to Russia, Russia blames Ukraine for the vampire rocket attack on Belgorod, and Russia claims a strategic initiative in the war, while Ukraine is running short of anti-aircraft guided missiles. So the residents have fled Russia's Belgorod region amid deadly cross-border attacks from Ukraine. So that is something else that is still in the news and definitely might have been replaced by some of the news in the sense of what's going on in the notion of the Israel and Hamas war. But definitely that is something that is still in the news. Just like another thing that's in the news is Japan prosecutors are making their first arrest in a financial scandal engulfing the ruling party. So these scandals that go on don't just take place here in the United States, because we all know about the Epstein scandal and other scandals, but they can also take place in other parts of the world as well. And a migrant caravan regroups in Mexico after government promise of papers falls through. And definitely that is something else that we know is very much in the news. A new caravan forms in Mexico as frustrated migrants are complaining about their visa delays. And migrants are continuing marching north in Mexico, I guess trying to get to this part of the world as well. And China says a foreign consultancy boss caught spying for the UK's M16 intelligence agency. So China's in the news for a lot of reasons as well. And a U.S. fighter jet fly over Bosnia in a sign of support to the country as Serbs are in their own fight as well. And apparently that flyover was a warning to secessionist Serbs. So definitely there's some folks that are supporting what's going on with Serbia as well. And shipping shows sign of panic as the Houthis menace key trade lanes. So that could even impact our own economy as well. So that's just some of the things that I was seeing in the news and all along those lines. So, like I said, a number of things are happening. It's just me and Nick. So we're going to see if anybody else joins us. But hey, Nick, what's your thoughts about this idea of a youngster running the country? So we've got this 34-year-old. We always complaining about our folks running the country, but we got this 34-year-old that's going to be apparently running this country of France. And I know some people on the network are fans of France. Some people are not that big of fans of France, but apparently a 34-year-old openly gay gentleman will be running that particular country while we're trying to figure out whether we get the 80-year-old Biden or the late 70-year-old Trump to be the ruler here. But what's your thoughts around this? We've got a youngster that is going to be running the country there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good idea. That's one of the problems I have with the political parties that exist in the United States. We only have two of them. They tend to have a monopoly, and they don't tend to develop people. In other words, they're not very supportive of the younger generation in terms of taking over. It's like a power grab, and they maintain power at any cost, really, to the country. They could care less as long as they're in power, and that goes for both parties. The Democrats, I mean, what are we doing with a 80-year-old, basically chosen person to be the runner with no opposition? And then the Republicans, 77, that means, Mark, he's going to be in his if he gets elected, he'll be in his 80s when he's governing. I mean, what happened to the 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds? Can you imagine 50-year-olds being young? 60-year-olds. I mean, are you telling me that our talent pool is that bad in the United States that we can't get a person to run that's younger? That we can't, and that we have to have these two people. Now, David Walker is trying the No Labels Party, but I've yet to see a candidate come out of the No Labels Party. In other words, who's going to be this third party runner? And will that person have a chance? My belief, you better have somebody really, really good on the president and vice president platform, or you're not going to have a chance, because the Democrats and Republicans basically run roughshod over this country. So as much as we complain about Russia being a one-party system with Putin and China being a one-party system with Xi, you have to look at what we have. We have a two-party system, and then that's it, And so, France has got this new person in. We'll see what they're able to do. Apparently, they got elected, and, we'll see what the 34-year-old can do. Maybe they'll do something innovative and bring France up in the world where they used to be. So, like I said, the jury's still out, obviously. They may have somebody.
The jury's still out and everything like that, but we'll see what he does now that he's been given that opportunity as the prime minister and everything. A few years ago, I think it was definitely before the pandemic, there was an explosion in downtown Durham that involved, I think it was some leaks and all along those lines. But apparently there was a one that was in Fort Worth, Texas, that left at least 21 injured. So I'm wondering, do we think that things are in good shape with our infrastructure? Because apparently there was an explosion in downtown Fort Worth, Texas, which we know is a major city. And apparently they're saying that a gas leak was the likely cause. And I do think that it was some things that were not done correctly infrastructure-wise in that one that I remember in Durham as well. So are we seeing these kind of incidents happen around the country because we're not taking care of our infrastructure?
Well, we're a big country, so with 330 million people, you just have to imagine even the Raleigh-Durham area is bigger than a lot of countries, just our area, and people don't realize how big this country is. And so with that, you're going to have some interesting issues on infrastructure. One, of course, involves the 737 MAX 9, which I found very interesting because in my younger days, I used to fly like every week, several times a week, and got on all sorts of planes. And the planes today are a lot better than the planes were 30, 40 years ago. The guiding systems are a lot better. Their avoidance of turbulence everything's a lot better. But with that in mind, every now and then there's a mistake. Okay, and apparently it's happened on this particular plane. They didn't need an emergency exit, so what they did is they plugged it with they basically plugged the emergency exit with this steel encasing, but somebody forgot to twist the knobs on tight enough to keep it in there. And it's not just this 737 MAX 9, it's several of them. So they found some errors in that. I believe it's definitely going to be fixed, but it's kind of astonishing that plug escaped all the regulations. In other words, to get out there and blow off and stuff like that. I think you're still safe flying. It's just that every now and then, because the infrastructure is so huge, that you're going to run into issues like that. Now we have the biggest issue that the media keeps ignoring. I think, Mark, that's going to be the biggest story of this year. And that's going to be what we're seeing right now that's happening at our borders. 4 million new immigrants that we know of crossing the borders. And that's a lot of people. I mean, you're talking about a city bigger than the Raleigh-Durham area, bigger than Charlotte, bigger than Atlanta, all coming in. And we tend to ignore that. Now, very interesting, though, that what Dave Walker brought up yesterday in economics, the House passed the border bill, but the Senate didn't do anything. So what we have is a situation where Congress isn't acting, and you have a situation where Joe Biden doesn't know what to do, and you have Abbott who's sitting at the border and decides, hey, I'm just going to build my own wall then, you know. But
he builds his own wall, or he ships them to states that don't necessarily want them, and then they wind up fighting them because one state will say that they won't accept them, and then the adjacent state winds up getting them dumped on them and everything. But both of those states are Democratic states, so he winds up shipping them to New Jersey and New York. And like I mentioned earlier in the story, part of what we say we don't want is the drugs coming over, even though we don't know whether the drugs are coming over all from Canada or from Mexico. But we did see that there's an Ecuador drug king that's running away, and who knows, he might have vanished into one of those migrant caravans for all we know and everything. If that's the case, he may wind up in the U.S. And I'm not saying that will help happen, because hopefully the folks in Ecuador will find him and he can be returned back to the prison cell where he was being held. But he did just apparently vanish, and they're trying to find out how he vanished and where he is heading. But apparently he was quite notorious, so it'll be interesting to see what happens and whether he is trying to rebuild his drug trade.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be the biggest problem in 2024. I noticed that the politicians have been, Trump says build a wall, and Joe Biden doesn't say anything about it. But it's going to be a big problem as the immigration problem. The Senate and Congress haven't solved it. We haven't solved it. It's almost like we're deer in the headlight with literally millions of people coming across the border. Or the biggest way people actually end up here is they overstay their visa. So that whole area of immigration is something that we're going to have to address. And of course, that also ties in with the fentanyl, 100,000 deaths. What I found out about our wonderful parties is they tend to ignore the issues. They're running on, personality.
This is very much about personality. Speaking of personality, I've got a question, because it actually came up even with some of and this is a legal question, some of the things that were going on even with the Civil War and civil rights, and some of the injustices that took place there, like Emmett Till and a number of other things. But if a person is like older age, or if they find the person that did it after the case and all along those lines, do we really need to drag the family into the conversation and everything? Because apparently in Virginia, it's just a state up from us and everything, the one Colonial Parkway case, apparently the Hampton homicide has been solved, and the Virginia State Police have closed 2 Colonial Parkway homicide cases, but a deceased man was identified as a suspect in decades-old local homicide. So apparently they have identified the suspect, and I'm thinking, if I'm reading this correctly, that suspect is now no longer here on the planet and everything. And I'm just wondering, is this going to bring out notions of his family and all along those lines? And do we really need to pursue a case after we find out that the defendant is no longer living and everything, because apparently that was the case. And I know in the case of Emmett Till and some of the accusations, the woman was still living, but she was very much in her older ages and in that space. But just wanted your thoughts around going after people when they're either older or not here.
Older, yes, depending on the crime. Dead, probably not, because there's nothing you can do about it at that point in time. But when it comes to our criminal laws, generally, most of the criminal laws are state specific. They're not federal. So when it comes to crimes, yes, there are certain federal laws, but the vast majority of them are states laws, and the vast majority of them differ. And that's where people have to realize you go from one state to another. What is a crime in one state may be totally legal in another. And then, of course, we have a mismatch of laws like we do in which I think our friend Jeff Eichen brings out. The states say, okay, smoking recreational marijuana is fine, but the federal government still says it's illegal. So unfortunately, we have a complex set of laws from the state. For example, and the good one is like in Las Vegas, free to gamble, but come to some other states, it's not free to gamble. So, it becomes a very difficult process because we have state and federal laws, and they differ from state to state and from the federal government to the state. So we do have a show that we have several shows that actually address legal issues, including
Lawyers Den, and we got a couple of other shows that address it. And of course, we got some lawyer types like you and Adam Lamparello, and I think Steve is a lawyer, and a number of others as well. How much do we know about our people that are in higher office? There's always been concerns around Biden's health and even some around Trump's health, but apparently there has been criticism swirling around the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's hushed up hospitalization. So apparently he was not feeling well, and some people are wondering whether they should have been more known about it. And I guess the Pentagon is even investigating his illness and everything. But how much should we be knowing about people, whether it's the president or the Defense Secretary or the Secretary of State, and their health and how healthy they are or aren't and everything? Because apparently there's a lot of criticism swirling around whether his hospitalization was hushed up by the government and whether there might be more that we should have known about his hospitalization. But I just wanted your thoughts around it, Nick.
My thought is that is a way overblown story. Okay, I did listen to the story. First of all, you do have HIPAA and you do have a certain amount of privacy. Second of all, of course, when you're a public figure like his, you're supposed to disclose, and there's probably a failure in communication. But in terms of this being a national, oh wow, gotcha story, it's a waste of time. And when I say that, Mark, in other words, we have a lot of stories that are not a waste of time. And one of it that David Walker brings up all the time is the $34 trillion US debt. And that's not being brought up all the time, and I hate to say it, the Secretary of Defense, because he went in for a operation that was apparently not mandatory, is not that big of a deal. And even if they failed to communicate, if necessary, the communication could go quite quickly. So why we're wasting time on stories like that?
Well, the United States time about interesting stories. We have an interesting twist in the Trump case and everything, because sometimes these things play like soap operas and all along those lines. So apparently, a Trump co-defendant is alleging that there was an improper relationship between Fani Willis, who is, of course, the main Georgia DA and everything, and a top Trump prosecutor. So definitely the co-defendant is seeking to disqualify the DA, which we know is the person, or one of the several, because there are 91 counts out there, that is going after Trump and everything, alleging a romantic relationship with a Trump prosecutor. So I guess they're thinking that the Trump prosecutor and this woman are having a tete-a-tete. And we do know that there can be folks that are on opposite sides of the aisle that are romantically involved. I remember that during the Clinton days, there was that political consultant that did some political consulting for the Republican side, and then there was the other person there was their husband that did it for the Democrats, and I can't think of their name, but you know the couple that I'm thinking about because they were very well known and were definitely on opposite ends of the political aisle, but were working together as husband and wife, even though they weren't working together for the same candidates and everything. But I do remember that being a case about 10 or so years ago, and all along that kind of way. And I'm trying to think of their name off the top of my head, but it's not coming to me. But I just wanted your thoughts around this because this sounds like another political maneuver. And we do know that there's a lot of political maneuver in these trials as well. So if you want to have political maneuvering, sometimes we remember from the OJ case, the soap opera element always works. So apparently this is a soap opera element as far as I'm concerned, because they're saying that, hey, Fannie, why are you going after Trump? You're in bed with Trump's prosecutor and everything. So why are you going after him? And this is like some serious political maneuvering in my mind.
It could also be some very serious legal ramifications to the prosecutors involved with somebody if that person is involved in a case, subject to really disbarment. I mean, we don't talk about Bill Clinton a lot, but basically he was disbarred. I don't know if you know that he got disbarred because of the shenanigans. It's the bar takes these things very seriously. So I don't know that much about the facts of that case, Mark, but given what you're saying it could be a real problem. Now, Donald Trump has also sought immunity, which I think he's going to have a real problem with this. I haven't talked to Adam about that, maybe on politics. I believe he doesn't have a case on immunity. I think it's there's nothing clear in the Constitution. In other words, it's kind of what I would call a loser. He's not going to win that. Now, will he win Maine getting tossed and Colorado getting tossed? I believe the answer is yes. He will be on the ballot because as somebody has correctly pointed out, there is no conviction for any of these insurrections, and hearings just don't cut it. In other words, hearings are not judicial trials. There are like really strict rules when it comes to federal rules of civil procedure, state rules of civil procedure that differ from state to state, how you call witnesses, how you do this whole thing called a trial. A hearing is that I hate to say it, just really doesn't count. So just because the Maine Secretary of State, who apparently is not an attorney, held a hearing, it's like you and I got together and we convict somebody. I mean, what's going on here? Because we believe the person is guilty. So the Missouri Secretary of State goes, well, if he's put off the ballot on Colorado and Maine, I'll just take him off the ballot. I'll take Biden off the ballot of Missouri. You see the problem? It's just not going to happen. So he has a winner there, I think. But on this immunity stuff, here's the problem, why he has a loser. If the president gets elected and he goes out and commits murder or does something really heinous, he's subject to the laws of the United States. There's no immunity from that. There's nothing out there that stops him from being immune because he's president. So I think he bought a loser there. He's got a couple winners, and unfortunately, it all ends up in the television and also ends up in the court. In the meantime, people are more concerned about the economy. And my concern is not short term, but it's long term. It's worse than climate change. Climate change will take place, 50 years from now, but the Social Security and Medicare running out of money will take place in the next decade. And we are not addressing that. The politicians aren't addressing it. There is unfortunately hard choices that have to be made. But if you make them now, you have a better chance in preserving both Social Security and Medicare. If you make them later, as David Walker's pointed out, there will be cuts of about 20% of your benefits. In other words, overnight, because of the, quote, crisis that could have been avoided 20 years earlier. So I think
speaking of which and everything, there is a case involving your favorite state and everything, and I was wondering your thoughts around this because a lot of times we take people's words because they make accusations. I know that Kim has brought it up a couple of times as well. I think we even talked about it with the Epstein case and all along those lines. But apparently in Florida, their top one of their top legal persons has been ousted. So the Florida GOP has ousted Christian Ziegler as the chair of that particular party amid various sexual assault allegations and all in that space. So definitely there have been some rape claims and some other claims as well. So the Florida GOP is saying, now we can't have this man running our party and trying to help DeSantis get elected president or retain his governorship should he not become president, and all along those lines. But I just wanted your thoughts as a legal person around this notion of believing what the alleged victims have said and all in that space, because there are these allegations and whether they have been collaborated or not. That I have not read the story enough to know what the collaboration is, but it does seem like the Florida GOP is basically trying to take a preventative action and saying that, well, there's accusations against you, so we got to get rid of you because we don't want that tarnishing our reputation.
Yeah. The thing is, that's the reason you have juries, you have trials. The real reason for a jury is not to determine what the law is, to determine what the facts are. Mm-hmm. And when you have a he said, she said, you have a problem with trying to determine the facts. And so then it goes to the issue of credibility of the witness. Do you believe witness A or do you believe witness B? Then it goes to the competency of the attorney who's representing you to get you to believe their client over his client, your client over their client. So it becomes a big circus, so to speak, Mark. In other words, a trial. It's a big show, and they have to bring out all the different types of facts to show that their side is better than the other side. It can be really a difficult situation, in other words, to determine that. But like I said, which remain to be seen. In the meantime, a lot of organizations, which you're describing, they just don't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want to be dragged through the mud, so they ask people to step aside. Because they just don't want to have their organization focusing on that when there are, again, other issues to focus on. And like I said, we do have a lot of issues that we need to focus on. Middle East is being one of them. There was a great article in the Wall Street Journal the other day about the decimation of Gaza. In other words, not only 20,000 people dying, but the place being leveled. In other words, the vast amount of destruction that took place on the Gaza Strip. This is going to be a real tough issue for people to examine because, yes, we also know what happened on the October 7th attack, and there's also evidence going on how heinous a crime that was. And then all of a sudden, to reply, what happens is the attack on Hamas, which has also, in some cases, been heinous on some of the civilians. So it's almost like the two wrongs do not make a right. The question is, which wrong is the worst wrong? And so this is going to be a big problem. So the Middle East basically is a mess, and it's going to be a difficult conversation for debates.
No, but part of that is also expanding because, like I mentioned earlier, we got Hezbollah involved. We've got certain certain Middle Eastern countries that are involved. So we got it seem like it's just widening and expanding and all in that space. So it could be the impetus for a bigger war and everything in that kind of way. So it'll be interesting to see what happens because a lot of people are concerned that it could be growing into a bigger war. Apparently, Blinken was over there and was saying that a Palestinian state was almost like a requirement and all along that kind of way. And I don't know that everybody agrees with that position. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is something that goes on as this war expands. And definitely a lot of people, like you said, are talking about the destruction of Gaza. And it's saying that 1 in 100 people in Gaza has been killed since October 7th. So that is 1% of the population that has been killed in these bombings and in that way. So it'll be interesting to see whether people are able to even rebuild it after they end the war and are able to come up with something in that space.
Right. Yeah. And the real question about Gaza, I mean, it is it looks to be a very densely populated strip of land. They have like 2 million people crammed in this small strip of land. So you have a place that's pretty difficult. And now it comes to rebuilding. And this is the problem I also have. Who pays for all this stuff? In other words, hey, we're going to rebuild. Who's we? Are you talking about the United States? And so even when it comes to Israel asking for money from the United States, I disagree. No, that's their thing. If they want to attack Gaza Strip, they need to pay for it. Don't ask the United States to supply money for your wars. Now here's the dichotomy, the difference. On Ukraine, I do think because it's defensive action, yes, we help them out. But on Israel, it's not a defensive action anymore. They're invading other countries, and that's on them. Notice that Ukraine is not invading anybody at this point in time. So the Gaza Strip is basically Israel's
But
problem.
what about this notion of what some people are saying, even with Israeli leadership? Because as I mentioned earlier, there's this notion, and apparently Bolivia has even backed this Gaza genocide case in the International Court of Justice. And in that way, and some people will find it ironic that South Africa is one of the people that were the ones that initiated that charge, as we know some of South Africa's history and all along that kind of way. But anybody's thoughts, and I see Jadovi's joined us as well around this international case and whether it even can stand up in the international courts as well.
Well, remember the ICJ and the United Nations are basically impotent. So you're asking for an impotent group to do something. The ICJ is ceremonial, the International Court of Justice. The countries have the right to abide or not abide. And same with the United Nations. The only thing that they can do is put peacekeeping troops, which in reality is they're putting human shields daring another country to shoot them down. That's about it. But other than that, both organizations are ceremonial, but really don't have any teeth behind what they're doing. And I remember at University of Miami, they had a whole master's in international law. And international law was always tough because you have to have the state actors agree to abide by it. If the state actors don't agree to abide by it, your international law is worthless. A good example is the treaties that Russia signed with Ukraine, and the agreements are worthless. The minute Russia says, okay, we're not going to abide by it anymore, what good is the treaty? And what good is future treaties with countries when they behave like that? So I always had a problem with the dubbing of international law, where in the United States, we have an enforcement mechanism for our laws. So if you lose a case, we have police officers, we have government institutions, we have enforcement mechanisms, where in international law, unless you get your state actor to stand up and do something, you're a TOL.
Well, speaking of that, and I know Toby has brought up this group before and everything, but they're in the news again because a lot of people thought that they were gone, like they want Hamas to be gone and everything. But Jacoby in some past shows has mentioned what happened with ISIS, and apparently there are some people that are saying that ISIS was behind the Kerman attack, and Iran still blames Israel and the United States, though. So there is some folks that are saying that the organization that a lot of people thought was no longer influencing anything in that part of the country may actually be the folks that were behind the attack that took place on the anniversary of Soleimani's death and everything. So I'll turn it to Jacoby because I know Jacoby has mentioned ISIS and how sometimes when we get rid of one force, we may be creating a bigger monster and everything. And he has used the example of ISIS several times and everything. So apparently ISIS isn't gone. Apparently ISIS is still out there and everything. So any thoughts around that, Jacoby? Because you mentioned ISIS a couple of times.
Well, I mean, it's just the same thing. It's one of those things that ISIS has an ideology the same way Hamas has an ideology, and when you can't really go to war with an ideology. So it's tough to say you want to rid the world of this ideology, but that the more you do that, it begins to sprout up in other areas. So there's got to be another tactic, another way to deal with these situations. And I think what Nick is talking about in terms of, it is true. We have no way of actually, we have no mechanism for holding somebody account except for money. And that's where that finances come into play and come into help. So we've got to figure out a way to deal with financial punishments.
Yeah, and the thing is, it really differs from country to country. But since you brought this situation up, the Iran ISIS, this is very strange because what happened was the West actually killed this individual, Suleiman, who the Iranians are worshiping. But the person that blew them up were actually Muslims, the ones that created it, because the Shiites and Sunni Muslim groups, frankly, Mark, they don't get along. So it's not like the Muslims operate as a uniform group. They're actually a very splintered group. And the Shiites and the Sunnis, sometimes they hate each other. And I think this was very tragic because there's a lot of people in Iran that have no interest in any of this stuff whatsoever. And they get caught up in these bombings that take place. But that's one reason I don't live in Iran. And that's the reason one of our guest commentators, Elshan Morad Dabi, whatever his name is, left Iran because I think it's a very difficult country to live in where the rules are so draconian, and it's worse than the Democrats and the Republicans here. You got to imagine the Sunnis and the Shiites, they're at each other's throat. So given the chance you can leave situations like that, do so. That's all I can say. And I think Sasha was smart. He was able to get out of the Soviet Union, and even smarter, he went to Canada. What a nice place to go to. There are some great places in the world to live. You know, you only have, somebody told me 75. And I said, what do you mean the number 75? I said, look, you only have 75 anniversaries. So in other words, you're going to live X amount of years, and that's it. So you better enjoy those years. And why spend those years in a war zone if you can go somewhere else and do well? So that's one reason also I'm more pro-immigration in the borders, because these people are living in war zones. They're living in really hostile environments, and a lot of them, and I think the vast majority of them, they want to have opportunities here to work and share in the hard work of the American dream. And we're cutting them off for reasons that I have yet to be able to see why, except that we can. Other than that, I don't see the reason. And the fact is, the U.S. is made up of immigrants. I'm sorry. Other than the Native Americans who we quashed into oblivion, everybody else is from somewhere else, you know? And the goal is to bring the immigrants here and make them productive using our, quote, superior capitalistic system, which is debatable, but still that's the kind of like the goal. So the immigration situation at the borders, I'm totally against.
Depending on your definition of when people got here and all along those lines, there are some that could argue that even the Native Americans, even though it was hundreds of years before, could be qualified as immigrants as well, because there is some historical notion that even they came from elsewhere before and settled this country first and everything. So they would have been the first settlers, but not necessarily the first people, because apparently it was an empty land and the Native Americans got here first, depending on how you want to believe the origin story of the Native Americans.
Yeah, they were the First Nations, but the thing is, like my ancestors, as I discovered, they came in here around the 1650s because they lost the Battle of Dunbar because they were royals, and being royalty doesn't necessarily mean life is good for you, especially when the parliamentarians under Oliver Cromwell didn't like the royals. So they lost the battle, and their choice was to come to British America, as the Plantagenets did, or be executed. So when you have those choices, you end up coming over here. So a lot of people, the ancestors that came here, a lot of them came under adverse conditions that took place overseas, and they ended up here, and then we built somewhat of a country out of it over the last 200 years.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Sasha, just really, hold on a second. Sasha, just really quickly, because I know you talked about it several times, what we need to do with Hamas, but apparently Israeli forces have killed 40 Hamas terrorists and have located the weapons cache, and they're saying that they located some of those underground tunnels as well. So they say that they have located the large underground weapons factory that was existing in Gaza. So I was wondering, because I do know you've been following that story just like you've been following Ukraine and everything, your thoughts about this, because they have claimed to have located the largest Gaza munition factory, and it does look like that could be a major blow to Hamas. But I was just wondering your thoughts around this.
Mark, I've seen the pictures of these tunnels that Palestinians build. It's not actually a tunnel. It's very sophisticated fortifications underground that can withstand even nuclear attack. The cars could go inside and drive during this tunnel and bring ammunition back and forth or so on. So they were preparing for years, if not dozens of years, to ultimate war against Israel. And they've done very sophisticated preparations or so on. And well, it's Israel's choice whether to leave it as it is and say, okay, let's have a peace and so on, or completely eradicate this threat to Israel and Israeli people. And it seems to me that the major reason for Israel to exist was the protection of Jewish people in a view of Holocaust during the Second World War. And if Israel cannot protect its citizen and even all Jews around the world, because potentially every Jew can emigrate to Israel and become instantly a citizen of that country, and thus use protection as Israel to provide. But if Israel cannot eradicate Hamas, that would be admission that Israel is no longer a place where Jews could feel safe, and that would be completely different meaning of the state of Israel. It has to redefine itself. It cannot provide protection to the Jews, but it can do some other things or so on, and just define that and admit that this purpose cannot be fulfilled under the circumstances. So in the view of that, it seems to me that Israel has no choice as to eradicate Hamas and completely kill all its members. And to go from there, I don't know what's a future plan. I believe that Israel, by winning 6 Days War in 1967, it became a rightful owner both of Gaza and West Bank. And it seems to me that unfortunately it had a rather poor administration of both, and all those botched Oslo agreements and all other bullshit. So that should have never, ever happened. It's Israel's territory. It's a people who either will live by the laws of Israel or out.
Because along the same lines, Sasha, one of the things that I guess Secretary Blinken is asking is protection for the civilians in that area. And me and Nick were talking about that before you and Jacoby joined. And they're also pushing Israel to consider a post-war Gaza future in concert with the rest of the region. So I just wanted your thought as somebody that has some of that heritage and everything as to whether that is going to be possible to sit down with, say, a Saudi Arabia or a Syria or some of these other countries and come up with a post-war Gaza future after the war is done.
Okay. As you see, Mark, it's over 50 years there was a peace between Israel and Egypt and Jordan. Why? Because they recognized the right of Israel to exist. One very simple thing. And there was no wars. There is a cordial relationship between Israel and Arab countries that recognized Abraham Accord. There are no wars, nothing. They recognized right of Israel to exist. On the other hand, Palestinians, they don't recognize the right of Israel to exist. And I'm saying Palestinians, not Hamas. Palestinians do not recognize the right of Israel to exist. How you can make any agreements with people who don't recognize your right to exist? It's actually, even from legal point of view, it's impossible. So if one country says that you don't have right to exist, why that country would make any agreement with the country that has, in their opinion, no right to exist? Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you have a real problem there, Sasha. But see, here's what I think is going to happen. First of all, I did predict they would just come in and level Gaza, which is true. But I think also you're going to see an occupation that took place similar to what happened to Germany and Japan by the United States. It was a long-term occupation, and you're going to see a long-term occupation by Israel in the Gaza Strip and also in the West Bank. And they're not going to give up the Golan Heights. That's ridiculous. In terms of Hezbollah and their shielding of the Hamas, they can rattle the saber all they want, but Israel is not going to let Hamas people go to Beirut or Lebanon and hide out there and direct attacks, period, the end, as you would say, Sasha, full stop. So what you're going to see is this. You're going to see a long-term occupation of the Gaza Strip. And in terms of the people there, hey, too bad. They didn't have to build tunnels. They could do like China. They built high-speed train lines. Okay, they built their infrastructure. They built big buildings. They built manufacturing. You saw what China did in Xi. He put together a economic juggernaut. He didn't build tunnels so that they could attack America or attack Taiwan and then run into little tunnels and hide by themselves. So this is Hamas's fault. It's their leadership fault and the people that support them. So they bought and paid for it. And this is what they got. In other words, it's almost like this.
I have a question, though.
Hey, as one of my homeowners association said, this is what you bought into.
I have a question, though, because
nobody's got a question.
Do the Palestinian people have a right to exist?
What do you mean right to exist? They have a right to live? Yes. Do they have a right to country? No. There's nobody that has a right to a country, including the U.S. You have to earn it the old-fashioned way. We earned it here. They have to earn it there. So they have the right to exist. Yeah, they have the right to live.
So the reason I asked that question is due to the fact of, yes, we all agree that the Israeli people have a right to exist. They have a right to defend themselves and so on and so forth. What Mark had brought up and talking about what Blinken was saying about, the protections for those individuals that are there, the Palestinian people, the people of Gaza, trying to, stop the killings of many of the innocent civilians there. And Sasha had talked about how he believes that the Palestinian people don't believe that the Israeli people have a right to exist, but he wants to completely occupy all of Gaza and remove all the Palestinian people. So
I didn't say that.
Yeah, I didn't think he said remove the Palestinian people. Said remove.
Never said
Hamas,
that.
which is a difference.
So then, if you're saying that the people of Gaza and the Palestinian people deserve a right to exist,
yeah.
do they also, because where they live and a lot of the battles, because as much as you say in 50 years there was peace, there was not peace. There were wars back and forth throughout that whole area has been very volatile.
What I'm saying,
So I'm asking,
peace between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Jordan. That's all.
yeah, I'm talking about the area within itself where the actual battle is being fought at this moment.
About any wars there. There were some uprising and some other stuff which Israeli took care of, and that's all what's happened there.
So what's going on now is still a part of what has happened years prior.
No, not really. On October 7th, the Gaza, its people, whether it's Hamas, Palestinians, and all together, they started the war against Israel.
It was. This is again getting where to I'm trying to ask this question because Hamas and the Palestinian people, again, are two separate entities.
No, disagree, 100%.
But again,
hold on a second, Sasha. So you're saying that everybody, because I do not believe in monolithic groups and everything. So I don't think that everybody that is Palestinian necessarily supports Hamas. But if I'm hearing you correctly, you think that Hamas and the Palestinians are one and the same and that you can't differentiate between the two.
Okay, it's not my belief. I'm not going to church or synagogue or anywhere. I'm analyzing the facts that you've seen on your iPhones or on television or so on. You've seen that on October 7th, the Hamas stormed through the wall separating Gaza from Israel. And there was not only Hamas people, there were a lot of Palestinians who also invaded, who were taking hostages and bringing.
Are you saying, it's just a simple answer. Are you saying that all the Palestinian people are Hamas?
No.
So then we can agree that the Palestinian people and Hamas are two separate entities.
No. The Palestinians,
it's one or the other. You can't say
Palestinians who have arms and weapons in their hands immediately becoming Hamas people. The only difference between Hamas people and Palestinians, Hamas people have weapons and Palestinians don't. But as soon as Palestinians have weapons, they're becoming Hamas. That's
are all the Palestinian people Hamas?
Probably not. But
you can't have it both ways. You can't say that, oh, they're not two separate entities because Palestinian people. No, either they're two separate entities, the Palestinian people are separate and Hamas is separate, or you completely see them as the same.
Are dreaming to become Hamas, but they don't.
So you are saying that the Palestinian people,
they would be all Hamas. That's all.
So you are saying that all the Palestinian people are Hamas by your words.
The only difference is that they don't have weapons.
So again, this is why I'm trying to get clarification. Let me explain. This is why I'm trying to get clarification. Because again, you are stating that the Palestinian people are Hamas.
Okay, if you wish,
and you are stating,
people are Hamas without weapons. As soon as they
become
regular Hamas.
You're not listening. You're not listening. You are saying.
Okay. I understand you're trying to catch me, so I will say.
I'm not trying to catch you. I'm not trying to catch you. I'm just trying to get clarification because I'm making a point. You are legitimately saying that Hamas and Palestine and the Palestinian people are the same. You are saying that, oh, well, they just don't have weapons. They're still Hamas, but they just don't have weapons. So you are saying that the Palestinian people are Hamas.
Yes, absolutely.
We have to go to Russia.
So again, just to get this point out, and the reason why I asked that question real quick, Nick, is because just as I stated earlier, and the reason I asked that question, do the Palestinian people, because they are two separate entities, no matter how many times you want to say they're Hamas, they are separate. You are Sasha, since you left, you stated that the Palestinian people and Hamas are the same and that Hamas had to be eradicated. So therefore, you are stating that the Palestinian people do not have a right to live, and that is wrong. That is the same attitude that you are fighting against, because Hamas has stated that the Israelis don't have the right to live. So therefore, this is a circular battle that is created by that same ugly attitude of eradication of the people that you disagree or dislike. So that is something that we have to get out of. The Israelis have a right to live. The Jewish people have a right to live. Beautiful people, unbelievably cultured. There's just so much that we can learn from the Israelis and the Jewish people, same as the Palestinian people and their culture, and the same with the innocent people that are there that are being killed. And that's what we have to get back to, is humanity and the honesty, that there is a problem and we keep this circular attitude. And that is what Blinken is trying to talk about. And that is what I think, Mark, you had talked about earlier, how ISIS is now popping up again, because you cannot kill an ideology by just dropping bombs on an ideology. You just create more people that are against you and find that ideology. Hey, maybe they were right. You're creating sympathizers by doing that.
No, I agree. It's definitely creating sympathizers and everything. We're going to go to the Ukraine-Russia show. Sorry about that technical glitch in terms of getting y'all the link and everything. I did have just one quick lighthearted question because I mentioned it earlier and everything. But and this is one that you'll enjoy as we head out the door and everything. But apparently in the UK, there is a mouse that is literally, I think it's called the Welsh Tidy Mouse, that is literally at late night cleaning up the gentleman's farmland and everything. So I was wondering if you've been following that story and what's going on with this mouse that has decided it wants to clean up folks, because that was one of the human interest stories that was out there, because apparently a mouse is over there in London and has become like a internet kind of sensation, because apparently it has been seen cleaning up the area in the late night. So I'm trying to figure out what he was doing on his farm and why the mouse decided that it wanted to be the tidier of the house and everything. But yes, this is a cute little story and everything. Hope you don't have one of those advice in your house or where you live at that is trying to clean up your space. But definitely there has been a cute little story where there has been a mouse running around trying to clean up this place. It is nicknamed the Welsh Tidy Mouse, and it takes on the task of cleaning this United Kingdom man's shed on a daily basis and everything. So hopefully you don't have one of those, but I'm still trying to figure out what he's doing to clean up the shed.
Yeah, I saw that story, but the only mouse that I've been keeping track of is Steamboat Willie right now. And seeing everybody do all these crazy things with Mickey Mouse now.
Yep, definitely. So on that note, we'll get on out of here and everything, but we'll have some more lively discussion about world politics on tomorrow, and definitely we'll have it later on this evening on world politics. But right now we're going to get on out of here, and I know they've already started the Russia-Ukraine show, and they actually have the gentleman, I think, from Ukraine that comes on that show, and I think that Tuesdays is the day he usually comes on all the time. So we'll see if Ivan pops in and his thoughts, because we didn't get to that much of that because Israel has been pushing the Ukraine story out of the news quite a bit. So we're ready to get on out of here.